Hi guys, and welcome back. Today I decided that I wanted to try out the 10-minute art challenge again. I did do this a long time ago, and this week I have a huge deadline coming up, so I have a lot of work to do, which is great because it's always nice to finish up projects, but it does mean that I'm pretty slammed this week, so the perfect solution, it seemed, for that would be to do a video that only literally took me 10 minutes to film. So a lot of people like to do the voiceover while they're drawing, but I knew that I would just completely shut off my talking while I was working on this. So this is going to be a voiceover on top of it afterwards, after I finish this one up. But I did have a plan in my head before I started working on this 10-minute challenge. And that was really what helps, is knowing what tools you're going to use, what colors, and then you can just go for it. It is always surprising how fast the time goes by though, but this one, I think that I was more prepared than the first time I tried it. I made sure that I had all the paints that I was going to use already moistened so that they would activate very quickly, and I had my Finetec gold palette. I chose which gold I wanted, and I had the water in it so that it was, again, activated, because that stuff takes a little while before it's actually turned into a paint. But yeah, I got everything set up, and I started sketching out with my Cool Erase pencil so I could have a loose, basic line work that I could work off of as I start inking it. And I chose a extra fine Sharpie pen, and I actually love using these when I'm sketching because it forces me to get out of only thinking about really fine details, and it gets me thinking about shapes and design, and I can create much more interesting and different types of line work than I do when I'm using the same tools that I always do. So I actually really love using these, and it was a perfect solution for a 10-minute challenge because I am able to very quickly create very expressive lines that group together well, and it was something that I could, again, very quickly do, but also that it was waterproof. That was a big point that I needed to make sure that it was going to stand up to the next step that I was going to do. So when I was planning this out, I did actually make sure that I chose things that I knew I could enact quickly, and I think that's the thing, is that when you're doing a challenge like this, is that you can choose what you are most comfortable with, but the nature of the challenge itself forces you into a very uncomfortable situation, which I like. I like that it's something that you're kind of balancing these two sides. You're choosing things that you know you can draw, and you know you can draw it quickly without even thinking about it. But then you have to draw so fast that you have to cut corners or cut things out that you'd normally spend a lot more time on. So I think it's really interesting. It definitely pushed me to put different kinds of textures in and different routes to get to a final result than I would normally ever think of, because I wouldn't think of that stuff until I needed it. And that's what they say. Necessity is the mother of invention. And when you're doing something so fast like this, you just have to choose different priorities, different ways to do them. And so for this one, I chose to do a portrait of a woman. Those are things that I can do pretty quickly. I consider drawing a hand, and I do love including hands. I feel like it just adds a lot more dimension to a piece than when it's just a static face and portrait. So I'm trying to do that more, but I knew that I wouldn't be able to draw the hand quickly enough. I know there's a lot of people who could, but I spend a little bit more time making sure that the fingers are shaped the way that I want and everything. So ultimately I planned this out in mind, knowing that I wanted it to be something that I could get from the beginning to basically the end. I know that pretty much any piece, I could work on it indefinitely. I could work on it and work on it, but I did want this thing to be filled up, each step done. And then it came time to one of my favorite parts of this piece, actually. I wanted to do this sort of ruffled collar to her dress, and because it's very quick, I didn't have time to be very fine and detailed and precise with it. So I created this very loopy line work for it with the Sharpie, and I really like that. That's something that I pretty much have never done in my pieces. I've done loose watercolor effects sometimes, but I've never done any sort of loose line work. Everything's always very, very defined. And that's generally the way I like it, but I really like the effect of this, of having some areas more defined, like her face and her eyes specifically, but then having these areas that were very expressive comparatively. So I actually think this is something that I might try in a more completed piece. Something that I spend more time on is planning something in like this, of letting part of it fall into more of a loose, organic, chaotic kind of a line art. And this part I think was my missed opportunity when I finally got to the watercolor part. I did it in a way that really didn't have the expression that I wanted, and it also just kind of got a little bit muddy. So I wanted it to be where her hair just kind of blended in with the background, but I didn't really have a very good concept of how I was actually going to make that happen. So I kind of did something a little bit loose, and then I tried to fill all of that in, all the hair in the background, with another color to mesh them together, and that did help. But I think what I should have done is I should have started off with one wet on wet layer so that I could get the basic shape of her hair, and then let that blend into the basic shape of the background in that color, and let those intermingle a little bit. And then I would have dried that singular layer out with my heat gun, rather than having to dry multiple layers out with my heat gun to get basically the same result, only it looks worse. But I could have done one layer like that, and then gone in with a finer brush and added detailing into the hair a little bit, and let that also fade into the background a bit. So that part's the most annoying, I think, because watercolors are just, they're so easy to create very impactful things very quickly, and I did not utilize them well, which seems like a shame because that is exactly what this challenge needed and wanted, and I just kind of, it didn't make it really happen. But I do basically like the way that it turns out. I think that overall, how the hair and how the background looks has that kind of a fadey, dreamy look that I wanted. I wanted it to feel antiqued and almost like it's this long lost, forgotten picture that's been in a drawer and you pull it out and it's all faded. So overall, it does still have the effect that I'd like and the overall feeling, but I could have made it happen a little bit better so that it would have had more expression in it. And the two colors that I really used for the hair were Quinacridone Violet and Payne's Gray. And I highly recommend these two paints. They're two of my all-time favorite paints to use. They create this really gorgeous, inky blue purple. I just don't even know how to describe how beautiful it is. But that's what I focused for the background. I started off with mainly the Quinacridone Violet, and then I let that dry, and then I dried it with my heat gun. And then I went back in with something that had more Payne's Gray mixed in, and that created a more darker blue color to add more shadow to it and more dimension. At least that was the plan, basically. But yeah, it was something that I could have been more precise with. I'll say that. But I did like playing with something that was not perfectly defined. Like when I normally do hair, I have it very clearly marked out, very, very rigidly inked in. So it was kind of fun to loosen that up and let it be part of the background and not be this thing that had to be very specifically defined. It was really fun to push whether it was part of the background, whether it wasn't, and it is very unclear in a lot of areas. And then I added some turquoise shadows on her face. It did need a little bit of some sort of watercolor shadow to really marry the background and the hair with the face, since the face was just very stark and sharpied, and it did need that last touch. And eventually I do go in and add a little bit more definition in the hair with the Sharpie, but that part was very last minute, and my pen, since it was on top of watercolor now, it was not working as well. So I wish that I had had like a normal size Sharpie for that step, because I think that I could have really finished off the hair a lot better and tied the face and the hair together more. But again, this is a 10-minute challenge that showed me things that if I were ever to do this again, things to be more planned and more prepared for in the future. And finally, just a little bit of gold that I think needed it for this little piece. I love having these embellishments to pretty much all of my pieces anyways. Most of the time I keep myself restrained, but this one, I think that since it was so simple and so quick and loose, I definitely wanted gold. But I did do this tear dripping down her face and then landing in this kind of a flower shape at the bottom. This is one thing that I definitely could have done a better job on. So overall, her face is very flat. I mean, there's barely any shadow. There's not much going on with it. So it is pretty flat. And that dripping gold tear was an opportunity for me to really show the curves of her face and emphasize that, but I didn't. I did it like straight down her face. But if I really wanted to enhance that, which I did, I wanted to after the fact, at least looking at it, I could have made sure that it followed the curve of going around the cheekbone and then back down into the hollow under the cheekbone and back around the jaw. So that's something that I think that seeing how quickly I just did it straight down, it shows me that I do need to get more used to the planes of the face and make that more part of my process. Because I think that if I was very, very in tune and nailed down on how to do the planes of the face, man, I would have been able to do that more secondhand. I wouldn't have to think about it. So the fact that I did it in such a flat way shows me that that's kind of my default thinking. So that does help me see that is something that I can work on for sure. I need to work on it hard enough so that if I were to do something fast like this again, it would immediately come out much closer to correct, or at least a lot more definition to it. And that is it for today's very quick video. At the very end of the footage, you can see where it's sped up, and that's where I gave myself about 3 minutes to add a few new layers to the watercolor. But overall, I don't think it really added much. If anything, it took it away. And I think that that's a good testament for the fact that I am very capable of overworking pieces. But yeah, that is it for today. I do post every Wednesdays and Saturdays, so I'll see you guys at my next video.